Hello everybody. If you want to read all the stories in full, please go to www.steveuk.blog. Thank you. Short story 636, A Day on the Brae, Intermediate, Homophones. On a misty morning, atop a Scottish brae, a steep hill overlooking the village, Angus stood with his dog, Rusty. The bough of an old oak tree swayed above, and Angus gave a respectful bow to the ancient tree, as if greeting an old friend. The village below was alive with chatter, but some folk let out boos at the sight of a cart carrying booze, barrels of whisky, for the annual festival. Angus chuckled, knowing the booze would soon bring cheer, not jeers. Angus, born in this village and having borne its hardships, loved the festival. As a boy, he'd race to the harbour, where a bright red buoy bobbed in the waves, marking the safe path for boats. Today, he'd help prepare. He grabbed a braid of rope, its fibres tightly woven, and headed to the village square, where a donkey brayed loudly, its voice echoing off the hills. "Quiet, ye beast," Angus muttered, patting its flank. In the square, Maggie was cooking. She'd braised mutton with herbs, filling the air with a rich aroma. Nearby, her brother Tam was a blacksmith, using a torch to braise metal, joining iron with molten brass. The donkey, still restless, let out more brays, startling Tam. "Mind your break, lad," Maddie teased as Tam nearly dropped his tools, risking a break in his work. Angus joined the bakers, who bred yeast to make fresh bread. The smell of rising dough was heavenly. Later, at the festival, folk would brew tea and coffee, though some would bruise their hands clapping to the music. As evening fell, the village danced under the stars, the booze flowing freely, the booze long forgotten. Angus, content, sat on the brae, Rusty by his side, watching the joy he'd helped create. The festival ended with a song, the donkey's final bray blending with laughter. Angus smiled, knowing he'd borne another year of tradition, his heart as warm as the bread he'd eaten. The village slept, peaceful, under the oak's swaying bough. Vocabulary notes. Booze. Noun. Meaning, alcoholic drinks, often used informally. Context, refers to barrels of whisky transported for the village festival, initially met with disapproval but later enjoyed. Example, the village below was alive with chatter, but some folk let out boos at the sight of a cart carrying booze, barrels of whisky, for the annual festival. Explanation, booze describes the whisky, highlighting its role in the festival's atmosphere. The word is informal and commonly used for any alcoholic beverage. Similar words. Liquor, a strong alcoholic drink, e.g., the pub served fine liquor. Alcohol, a general term for drinks like beer or wine, e.g., he avoided alcohol at the party. Spirits, distilled alcoholic beverages, e. Stewart. Brae. Verb, past tense, brayed. Meaning, the loud, harsh cry of a donkey or similar animal. Context, describes the sound made by a donkey in the village square, adding to the lively atmosphere. Example, nearby, a donkey brayed loudly, its voice echoing off the hills. Explanation, Brae captures the distinctive, noisy sound of the donkey, contributing to the story's vivid rural setting. The past tense brayed is used to describe a specific moment. Similar words. Neigh, the sound a horse makes, e.g., the horse neighed as it galloped. Bellow, a loud, deep cry of an animal or person, e.g., the bull bellowed in the field. Squeal, a high-pitched cry, often from a pig, e.g., the piglet squealed when picked up. Braise. Verb. Meaning, to cook food slowly in a small amount of liquid, often with herbs or spices. Context, describes Maggie's method of cooking mutton, enhancing the sensory details of the festival preparations. Example, in the square, Maggie was cooking. She'd braise mutton with herbs, filling the air with a rich aroma. Explanation, braise refers to a cooking technique that produces tender, flavorful meat, emphasizing the communal and traditional aspects of the village festival. Similar words. Stew, to cook food slowly in liquid, similar to braise but often thicker, e.g., she made a hearty beef stew. Simmer, to cook gently just below boiling, e.g., simmer the sauce to blend the flavors. Poach, to cook gently in liquid, often for delicate foods like eggs. E.g. He poached eggs for breakfast. Brake. Noun. Meaning, a device for slowing or stopping a vehicle or machine. Context, used humorously by Maddie to refer to Tam's need to slow down and avoid breaking his tools. Example, mind your brake, lad. Maddie teased as Tam nearly dropped his tools, risking a break in his work. Explanation, brake is used metaphorically to suggest Tam should slow down or be careful, playing on its homophone brake to create a pun that adds humor to the scene. Similar words. Clutch, a device in vehicles to engage or disengage power. E.g. He pressed the clutch to change gears. Pedal, a foot-operated control, often for brakes. E.g. She slammed the brake pedal. Restraint, something that holds back or controls. E.g. The harness was a restraint for the donkey. Bread. Noun. Meaning, a food made from flour, water, and yeast, baked into loaves. Context, describes the fresh loaves made by the village bakers, a staple of the festival's feast. Example, Angus joined the bakers, who bred yeast to make fresh bread. Explanation, bread is central to the story's depiction of communal eating, paired with bread to describe the yeast cultivation process, emphasizing traditional village life. Similar words. Loaf, a shaped mass of baked bread. E.g. She sliced the loaf for sandwiches. Dough, the unbaked mixture for bread. E.g. The dough rose slowly overnight. Roll, a small, round piece of bread. E.g. They served warm rolls with dinner. Story written by Grok AI. Image created by Grok AI. To read all the stories in full, please go to www.steveuk.blog. Thank you.
Hello and welcome. Today, we're jumping into this really charming story set in the Scottish Hills, and our goal is to uncover the meaning behind some pretty tricky words. So let's get started with A Day on the Brae.
And you know, that's a fantastic question, right? How can a story do that? Well, it's because stories do so much more than just entertain. They actually give words a home, a place to live and stick in your brain. Today, we're going to see exactly how context, sound, and a little bit of narrative can make even the most confusing words totally unforgettable.
Okay, so let's set the scene. Our guide for this journey is a villager named Angus, and the setting? A Scottish brae, which is just a fancy word for a steep hill. Our mission, if we choose to accept it, is to spot 5 very specific words as he goes about his day getting ready for the big annual festival.
So our story kicks off right in the middle of the village square. It's bustling, you can feel the excitement in the air for the celebration, and this is exactly where we're going to find our first couple of words.
And boom, right away, the story gives us a perfect little puzzle. A car pulls up and you hear 2 sounds that are almost identical. First, there are boos from some unhappy villagers, and then there's what's actually in the cart. Booze. It's just a great example of how one little letter can completely change everything.
So, booze is pretty simple. It's just an informal noun for alcoholic drinks. In our story, it's the barrels of whiskey for the festival. You know, the fun stuff that'll be enjoyed long after those grumpy boos are forgotten.
Now, if you wanted to be a bit more specific, you could say liquor or alcohol or spirits, but booze is just that more casual, everyday term. It's what you'd probably hear friends in the village say. Okay, now listen. In the middle of all the chatter, another sound just cuts right through the air. And this time, it's not a person. It's a donkey, making sure everyone knows it's there. It really adds to the whole soundscape of the village.
And that very specific sound, it's called a brae. It's not a bark, it's not a moo, it's that really distinct, loud, kind of harsh cry that only a donkey can make. It just paints such a vivid picture of a lively rural village, doesn't it?
Just think about it. Animal sounds are so specific. A horse will neigh, a bull might bellow, and a pig could squeal, while the word brae is just as precise and it adds that perfect, authentic detail to our story.
Okay, so moving from the sounds of the village, now we're going to follow our noses to this incredible, rich aroma. The festival prep is really kicking into high gear, and Maggie is busy cooking a traditional dish. The way she's cooking it gives us our next word.
So to braise something is a specific cooking technique. It's where you sear the meat first, then let it simmer really slowly in a covered pot with just a little bit of liquid. And the result? Super tender, flavorful meat. exactly like the mutton Maggie's making.
Now, this isn't quite the same as making a stew, which usually has way more liquid, and it's definitely not poaching, which is a much gentler process. To braise is this masterful way of turning a tough piece of meat into something absolutely delicious using that slow, moist heat.
All right, let's move on. Next up, we're going to see how a little wordplay can add some humor to the scene. This next part is all about listening really closely to how words sound.
Okay, check this out. The story gives us this really clever bit of village humor. Maggie yells, "Mind your brake" at Tom, the blacksmith. But she's not actually talking about a part on a cart or a machine. She's playing with two words that sound exactly the same but mean totally different things.
Here's the joke, laid out side by side. A brake, B-R-A-K-E, is a device to stop something. But break, B-R-E-A-K, means to shatter or interrupt something. So Maggie's cleverly telling Tam to slow down before he accidentally breaks something. Pretty good, right?
So the word we're really zoning in on here is break, the noun. It's all about control, a mechanism for stopping. Maggie's just using it in this fun, metaphorical way, like saying, hey, hit the brakes, slow down a bit.
You can kind of think of it in the same family as other words for control, like a clutch or a pedal. At its core, it's a form of restraint, which is exactly what Maggie was teasing Tam about needing at that moment.
All right, for our very last word, we're heading over to the bakers. And here we find another pair of words that are super closely linked, not because of a joke this time, but because of a delicious process.
So in the story, we see that the bakers bred yeast. Now, I know that might sound a little weird, but it's actually the absolutely essential first step to creating the yummy final product that's mentioned right there in the same sentence.
Here's how that works. It's really cool. First, the bakers cultivated or bred the yeast. You know, that's the living organism that makes the dough rise up. Then, in step 2, that very same dough gets baked into what we all know and love, fresh bread. So you see, one process leads directly to the other.
And there it is, our final word, bread. A simple, essential food that's really the cornerstone of the whole festival feast. And it's the delicious result of that whole breeding process.
Of course, bread is part of a whole family of awesome baking terms, right? Like loaf, dough, and roll. But it's really the star of the show, the centerpiece of all the baker's hard work.
So let's pull all that together for a second. It's like we walked through the village with Angus and just collected these 5 words, each one tied to a specific moment. We had the booze for the festival getting booze from the crowd. We heard that donkey's loud bray echoing off the hills. We could practically smell Maggie's mutton as it started to braise. We got a good laugh out of her clever joke about hitting the brake. And finally, we saw how yeast that was bred becomes fresh bread for the feast. See what I mean? Every single word has its own little story.
And really, this brings us back to that main idea. A good story doesn't just entertain you, it teaches you. It gives words a home, a memory that you can attach them to. So think about it for a second. What's the most confusing word that a story finally made click for you? It's pretty amazing how a little bit of context can make all the difference in the world.